In Manhattan, there's an unwritten rule. Never look the devil in the eye, and never stand between him and what he protects. But on a snowy Friday night at the Meridian, an exhausted waitress named Elena Marshall broke both. She didn't know the 9-year-old boy cowering alone at table 12 was Marco Romano, the only surviving heir of New York's most feared crime lord. She didn't know the man watching silently from the mezzanine above was Dante Romano, known as Il Diavolo, a devil who hadn't opened his heart to anyone since watching his wife burn to death in a car bombing 4 years ago. When a drunken guest grabbed the boy by his collar and raised a champagne bottle overhead, Elena didn't think. She threw herself forward, shielding the child with her own battered body. That split-second decision would drag her into a war between two criminal empires, transform her from prey into queen, and bring the devil himself to his knees before the one woman he swore he'd never love. This is the story of how a girl with nothing left to lose saved a wolf cub and was claimed by the pack. The champagne bottle exploded against Elena's back with a sound like a thunderclap. Glass shattered into 1,000 glittering fragments, raining down like frozen tears onto the pristine marble floor. The entire restaurant fell silent. Forks stopped midway to mouths. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the soft jazz playing through hidden speakers seemed to fade into nothing. Elena felt the glass bite deep into her shoulder blade, her lower back, the tender skin along her spine. Warm blood began to seep through her white uniform, spreading like crimson flowers blooming in snow. The pain was blinding, white-hot, immediate. But she didn't let go. She kept her arms wrapped tight around the trembling boy, pulling his face against her chest, shielding his eyes from the chaos. "Don't look, sweetheart," she whispered through gritted teeth. Her voice was steady even as her body screamed. "Keep your eyes closed. I've got you." Marco Romano clutched her uniform with both small fists. His entire body shook like a leaf in a hurricane. He hadn't spoken to a stranger in 4 years. Not since the morning he watched his mother burn alive through a window while he screamed for someone to save her. But now, pressed against this stranger who smelled like coffee and kitchen grease, and something warm he couldn't name, words escaped him before he could stop them. "Are you dying?" His voice was barely audible, cracking on the last word. Elena's heart shattered worse than any glass could. "No, baby," she lied. "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." Raymond Cross stood frozen 3 feet away, the broken bottleneck still clutched in his meaty fist. Champagne and blood dripped from the jagged edges. His face cycled through emotions like a slot machine. Confusion, then recognition, then dawning horror as alcohol-soaked brain cells finally connected the dots of what he had just done. "The bitch attacked me," Cross bellowed, spinning toward the frozen crowd. His face had gone from flushed red to sickly pale. "You all saw it. She assaulted me. I'm the victim here." No one moved. No one breathed. Margaret Chen, the floor manager, rushed over on clicking heels. Her face was a mask of professional panic, the kind perfected by years of handling wealthy clients and their tantrums. "Mr. Cross, please," she stammered. Hands raised. "Let's move to the private lounge and discuss. There's nothing to discuss." Cross jabbed a finger at Elena. "Fire her. Call the police. I'll sue this entire establishment." Margaret's eyes darted between Cross and the bleeding waitress and the small boy who shouldn't have been left alone in the first place. She opened her mouth to speak. 3 seconds of absolute silence followed. Then, from the mezzanine balcony above, a sound drifted down that made every person in the room turn to ice. Clap. 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 Slow. Deliberate. Each clap echoing like a gunshot in the frozen stillness. Margaret Chen's face went white as fresh snow. Raymond Cross stopped shouting mid-word. The soft jazz died completely. Heavy footsteps began descending the marble staircase. Each step landed with the weight of inevitability, the measured pace of a predator who knew his prey had nowhere to run. Elena looked up through pain-blurred vision, still clutching Marco to her chest. A figure emerged from the shadows above, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Dante Romano descended the marble staircase, like darkness given form. The chandeliers above seemed to dim as he passed beneath them, their light shrinking away from his presence, as if even electricity knew better than to touch him. He wore a black 3-piece suit that absorbed the ambient glow, making him appear as a silhouette carved from midnight itself. His hair was swept back from a face that could have been sculpted from granite, sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could cut glass, lips pressed into a line that had forgotten how to smile. But it was his eyes that made grown men forget how to breathe. Black as oil, black as the bottom of the ocean, black as a grave at midnight. He moved with the fluid grace of a panther stalking through tall grass. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Every step deliberate, purposeful, deadly. The temperature in the room plummeted. Guests who had been frozen in shock now seemed frozen in terror. Senator Williams at table 6 suddenly found his napkin fascinating. The tech billionaire near the window developed an intense interest in his wine glass. No one made eye contact. No one dared. From the shadows of the restaurant, 4 men materialized like ghosts summoned by their master's presence. They wore dark suits and darker expressions, moving to surround Raymond Cross with mechanical precision. At their head stood Bruno Santini, a mountain of muscle with a face like weathered stone and hands that had broken more bones than most doctors had mended. Cross watched them approach and felt his bladder threaten to release. The alcohol haze evaporated from his brain with brutal speed as recognition finally struck. "Dante." Cross's voice came out as a squeak. "Dante, I didn't know. I swear to God. I didn't know he was yours. I was drunk. It was an accident. I'll pay for everything." All but Dante Romano did not look at Raymond Cross. He walked past the stammering man as if he were furniture, past the terrified manager, past the frozen waitstaff and the cowering guests. His eyes were locked on only one thing, the bleeding woman holding his son. Dante stopped 2 feet away and lowered himself to one knee. The movement was slow, controlled, almost gentle. When he spoke, his voice transformed completely. The ice melted into something Elena had never expected to hear from a man who looked like death incarnate. "Marco." Soft, tender, a father's voice. "Are you hurt?" Marco lifted his face from Elena's chest. Tears streamed down his cheeks, but he shook his head. "She saved me, Papa." The boy's small hand pointed at Elena, his finger trembling. "The bad man tried to hit me. She jumped in front. She's bleeding really bad." Dante's gaze shifted to Elena for the first time. He studied her face from inches away. She was thin, too thin, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too many shifts and too little sleep. Her skin had gone pale from blood loss, waxy and gray. Her uniform was soaked crimson across the back. But her eyes were blazing. No fear, no pleading, just fierce, defiant protectiveness. Even now, even as she bled onto his restaurant floor, Dante felt something crack in his chest. A hairline fracture in walls he had spent 4 years fortifying. He stood slowly, his expression hardening back into stone. When he turned to face Raymond Cross, the softness vanished completely. "Take Mr. Cross to the basement." Dante's voice carried across the silent restaurant like a funeral bell. "He seems confused about how to treat children. Educate him." Cross opened his mouth to scream. Bruno's massive hand clamped over it before any sound escaped. The 4 men dragged him toward a service door, his expensive shoes squeaking uselessly against the marble. His muffled cries grew fainter and fainter until a heavy door slammed shut and silence reclaimed the room. Dante turned back to Elena. She was trying to stand, her legs shaking violently beneath her. Blood dripped steadily onto the white floor. Her jaw was clenched with stubborn determination, even as her body betrayed her. Their eyes met, and something passed between them that neither could name. Margaret Chen chose that moment to reassert her authority. She stepped forward, smoothing her blazer with trembling hands, desperate to regain control of a situation that had spiraled far beyond her pay grade. "Miss Marshall," her voice came out sharp, clipped, professional. "You're fired, effective immediately. You assaulted a VIP guest and caused a disturbance that Elena tried to speak." Her lips parted, forming the beginning of a protest, but the pain ripped through her back like lightning. The words died in her throat. She could only stand there, swaying, blood pooling at her feet like a crimson shadow. Dante turned his head slowly toward Margaret Chen. The manager's voice withered and died. "She's fired." Dante repeated the words softly, almost gently, like a man discussing the weather, like a man deciding whether to crush an insect, for protecting a child. Margaret's mouth opened and closed. No sound emerged. Dante reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew his phone. He dialed a number without looking at the screen, held it to his ear, and spoke exactly 2 words. "Buy it." He ended the call. Silence stretched across the restaurant like a held breath. Dante slipped the phone back into his pocket and regarded Margaret Chen with eyes that held all the warmth of a winter grave. "I just purchased this restaurant." His voice remained soft, conversational, terrifying. "The building as well, which means you are now trespassing on my property. I suggest you leave before I have Bruno escort you out the same way he escorted Mr. Cross." Margaret Chen did not need to be told twice. She turned and fled, her heels clicking a frantic rhythm against the marble until the sound disappeared through the front entrance. Elena watched her go through a haze of pain and confusion. The adrenaline that had kept her standing was draining away fast, leaving nothing but agony and exhaustion in its wake. "I need to go." The words scraped out of her throat like sandpaper. "My sister, she needs her medication. I have 2 other jobs. I can't. You're bleeding through your uniform." Dante cut her off. "You need a doctor." Elena almost laughed. It came out as a wet cough instead. "I can't afford a doctor, Mr. Romano." She met his eyes with fading defiance. "I can't afford anything. That's the whole point." Her knees buckled without warning. Dante moved faster than a man his size should have been able to move. His arms caught her before she hit the floor, one sliding beneath her knees, the other supporting her back. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest like something fragile and precious. "Bruno." The name was a command. "Bring the car around, now." Elena tried to protest. She tried to push against his chest, to demand he put her down, to explain that she couldn't just disappear because Lily was waiting and the rent was due and she had a shift at the diner in 6 hours. But the words wouldn't form. The world was turning gray at the edges, soft and fuzzy like static on an old television. Small footsteps pattered across the marble. Marco appeared at Dante's side, his face streaked with tears but his jaw set with determination. He reached up and grabbed Elena's limp hand with both of his, clutching it tightly as they walked toward the exit. Dante looked down at his son and felt his chest tighten. 4 years. 4 years since Isabella died in that car meant for him. 4 years since Marco had stopped speaking to anyone outside the family. 4 years since the boy had willingly touched another human being besides his father. And now here he was, holding a stranger's hand like she was the only anchor in a storming sea. The night air hit them like a wall of ice as they stepped outside. Snow swirled through the darkness, catching the streetlights like falling stars. A black SUV pulled up to the curb, Bruno behind the wheel. Dante slid into the back seat, Elena still cradled in his arms. Marco climbed in beside them, never releasing her hand. As the vehicle pulled away from the Meridian, Dante found himself staring at the unconscious woman bleeding onto his $1,000 suit. Her face was peaceful now, the fierce defiance softened by oblivion. She looked young, fragile, breakable, but she had thrown herself in front of a bottle for a child she didn't know. A memory surfaced unbidden. Isabella, laughing in the morning sunlight. Isabella, kissing Marco's forehead. Isabella, waving goodbye as she took his car because hers wouldn't start. Isabella, burning. Dante closed his eyes against the image. When he opened them again, he looked at Elena Marshall and whispered into the silence of the speeding car. "Who are you?" Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Manhattan in white as the SUV disappeared into the night, carrying its passengers toward the Romano estate and a future none of them could have predicted. Consciousness returned to Elena in fragments. First came the smell. Not the bleach and despair of a city hospital. Not the mildew and grease of her cramped apartment. This was lavender and fresh linen, and something expensive she couldn't name. Then came the softness. She was lying on something that felt like a cloud, wrapped in sheets smoother than anything she had ever touched. Her eyes flew open. Panic seized her chest like a vice. She was in a bedroom that looked like it belonged in a magazine. A king-size bed with a carved mahogany headboard dominated the space. Velvet curtains and deep burgundy framed floor-to-ceiling windows that revealed a garden blanketed in pristine snow. Crystal chandeliers caught the pale morning light. Oil paintings and gilded frames lined walls covered in silk wallpaper. Elena tried to sit up and gasped as pain exploded across her back. "Easy." A woman's voice, calm and professional. "You'll tear your stitches." Elena turned her head. A woman in her early 40s stood beside the bed, wearing a white coat and a reassuring smile. She had wire-rimmed glasses and kind eyes that had clearly seen worse than a panicking waitress. "I'm Dr. Serena Vance," the woman said, gently pressing Elena back against the pillows. "I handle the medical needs for the Romano family. You've been unconscious for about 8 hours. Where am I?" Elena's voice came out hoarse, cracked. "The Romano estate, Long Island." The words hit Elena like ice water. 23 stitches in your back and shoulder," Dr. Vance continued, checking Elena's pulse. "A mild concussion from when you hit the floor. You're extremely lucky. A few inches to the left and the glass would have severed your spine." Elena barely heard her. Her mind was spinning, calculating, panicking. "I need to leave." She tried to push herself up again. "My sister, Lily, she needs her medication. It's Thursday. I was supposed to pick up her prescription last night. If she misses a dose, Miss Marshall, you don't understand. She has lupus. Stage 3. If she doesn't take her medication on time, she could." The bedroom door opened. Dante Romano walked in carrying a thick manila folder, and every word died in Elena's throat. He had changed from last night's blood-stained suit into a charcoal gray one that probably cost more than her annual salary. In the daylight streaming through the windows, he looked less like a shadow and more like a man, but only barely. Those black eyes still held depths that made her stomach clench. Lily Marshall, Dante's voice cut through the room as he flipped open the folder. 22 years old. Diagnosed with systemic lupus erythematosus, stage 3, at age 17, currently on the waiting list for a kidney transplant. Monthly medication costs approximately $3,500. She lives with you in a studio apartment in South Bronx. Has been housebound for the past 4 months due to declining health. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. You investigated me. It wasn't a question. Dante looked up from the folder, his expression unreadable. I investigate everyone who breathes near my son, Miss Marshall. Everyone. He flipped a page. Elena Rose Marshall, 28 years old. Father died in a construction accident when you were 8. Company denied workers' compensation. Mother developed breast cancer when you were 14. Died 2 years later, leaving you with over $180,000 in medical debt. You entered the foster system at 16, aged out at 18. Elena's hands clenched the silk sheets. You were accepted into Columbia University's nursing program on a full scholarship. Dante continued reading, his tone flat, clinical. Dropped out in your 3rd year when your sister's diagnosis required full-time care. Since then, you've worked an average of 3 jobs simultaneously, currently employed as a morning prep cook at a bakery, an evening waitress at the Meridian, and an overnight janitor at an office building 3 nights a week. He closed the folder. You sleep approximately 4 hours a night. You owe $47,000 to a loan shark named Victor Crane, and you haven't purchased new shoes in over 2 years. His eyes dropped briefly to the corner of the room where her worn sneakers sat, holes visible in the soles. The ones you wear have holes in them. Silence filled the room. Elena stared at him, feeling stripped bare, exposed. Every secret, every struggle, every shame laid out on paper like a coroner's report. Why do you care? The question came out sharper than she intended. Dante studied her for a long moment. I don't. He walked to a chair near the window and sat down, crossing one leg over the other with the casual grace of a king settling onto his throne. But my son does. His dark eyes met hers. And that makes you interesting, Miss Marshall. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. What do you want from me? Dante leaned back in the chair, the morning light casting half his face in shadow. I have a proposition. Elena's spine stiffened against the pillows. A proposition. Of course, men like Dante Romano didn't save bleeding waitresses out of kindness. Everything was a transaction. Victor Crane. Dante spoke the name like it left a bad taste in his mouth. The man you owe $47,000 to. Do you know who he works for? Elena shook her head slowly. Nikolai Petrov. Dante let the name hang in the air. Head of the Russian Bratva on the East Coast. My competitor. My enemy. Crane is one of his collection agents. A bottom feeder who preys on desperate people and funnels their money straight into Petrov's war chest. The words sank into Elena's stomach like stones. I don't understand. I just borrowed money for Lily's medication. You didn't know. Dante's tone held no accusation, only cold fact. But it doesn't matter. You owe money to Petrov's people. That makes you a pawn in his game against me. A pressure point. A potential source of information. His eyes darkened. A weapon waiting to be used. Elena felt the walls of the beautiful bedroom closing in around her. What does that have to do with last night? Perhaps nothing. Perhaps everything. Dante uncrossed his legs and leaned forward. Petrov has been looking for leverage against me for months. If he discovers that a woman in his debt just saved my son's life, he'll find a way to exploit that connection. You'll become a target. Elena's mouth went dry. So what? You're going to let me walk out of here knowing all this? No. The word was simple. Final. I'm going to offer you an alternative. Stay here. Become a companion to Marco. In exchange, your debt to Crane disappears. Your sister receives the best medical care money can buy. Private doctors. Experimental treatments. A place at the top of the transplant list. Elena stared at him. The offer hung between them like a golden apple laced with poison. Everything she had prayed for, everything she had worked herself to the bone trying to achieve, handed to her on a silver platter, by a man nicknamed the Devil. I'm not for sale. The words came out harder than she intended. Dante's expression didn't change. I'm not buying you, Miss Marshall. I'm hiring you. There's a difference. What difference? Elena pushed herself up straighter, ignoring the screaming protest from her stitches. Either way, I'm trapped in your cage. A pretty cage with silk sheets and private doctors, but still a cage. You own my debt. You control my sister's health care. You decide if I stay or go. Her eyes blazed into his. That's not employment. That's ownership. Something flickered across Dante's face. Surprise, perhaps. Or something closer to respect. You're the first person to talk back to me in 10 years. His voice dropped half an octave. Everyone else is too scared. Then everyone else hasn't survived what I have. Elena held his gaze without flinching. I've survived foster homes where the fathers came into your room at night. I've survived debt collectors who threatened to break my kneecaps. I've survived 3 jobs on 4 hours of sleep for 6 years straight. She lifted her chin. You don't scare me, Mr. Romano. Dante rose from the chair. He moved toward her slowly, each step deliberate, until he stood beside the bed looking down at her with those fathomless black eyes. The morning light carved shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp angles, the predatory stillness. I should scare you, Elena. Her first name rolled off his tongue like dark honey. I'm the devil, remember? Ask anyone in this city. They'll tell you stories that would turn your hair white. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, but she refused to look away. Devils don't save children. Her voice came out steady despite the trembling in her chest. Devils don't kneel on restaurant floors to ask if their son is hurt. Devils don't carry bleeding waitresses to their cars instead of leaving them on the street. She tilted her head. So either you're lying about what you are, or I'm lying about being scared. Silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. Dante stared at her with an expression she couldn't read. Something was shifting behind those dark eyes, some calculation or reassessment that she wasn't privy to. For a long moment, neither of them breathed. Then a soft knock broke the tension. 3 gentle taps on the bedroom door. So quiet they were almost inaudible. Dante's head turned toward the sound, and for the first time since Elena had met him, she saw his expression soften into something almost human. Come in, Marco. The door creaked open slowly, and a small face appeared in the gap. A soft knock interrupted the standoff. Both Elena and Dante turned toward the door. It creaked open slowly, hesitantly, revealing a small figure standing in the hallway. Marco Romano clutched a worn sketchbook against his chest. His dark hair was disheveled, sticking up at odd angles as if he had been tossing and turning all night. His eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, shadowed with exhaustion. He wore pajamas decorated with cartoon whales, and his bare feet looked impossibly small against the cold marble floor. He had been waiting outside that door for hours. Elena would learn later from Dr. Vance that the boy had refused to leave, refused to eat, refused to sleep. He had simply sat against the wall with his sketchbook, drawing and waiting for the woman who had bled for him to wake up. Marco's eyes found Elena, and something in his small body seemed to unclench. He padded into the room on silent feet, moving past his father without acknowledgement. Each step was careful, deliberate, as if approaching a wild animal he didn't want to startle. When he reached the edge of the bed, he stopped. For a long moment, he simply stared at her. Then, with trembling hands, he held out the sketchbook. I made this, he whispered. For you. Elena took the offering gently, her wounded back protesting as she shifted to look at it properly. Her breath caught in her throat. The drawing showed a woman with long brown hair and a kind face. She had enormous white wings spreading from her shoulders, feathered and beautiful, reaching toward the edges of the page. In her arms, she cradled a small boy with dark hair. They were surrounded by snowflakes, each one carefully detailed, falling around them like a protective cocoon. The woman was smiling. The boy was safe. You're my angel. Marco's voice was barely audible, fragile as spun glass. Mommy was an angel too. She had brown hair like you. She used to hold me when I was scared. He paused, his lower lip trembling, but she went away. She went to heaven and she didn't come back. Elena felt tears burning behind her eyes. Please don't go away. Marco's voice cracked on the words. Please, I'll be good. I promise I'll be good. Just please don't leave like Mommy did. Behind them, Dante Romano stood frozen. His hands had clenched into fists at his sides. His jaw was locked so tight Elena could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. But his eyes had shattered. This was the most his son had spoken to a stranger in 4 years. 4 years of silence. 4 years of therapists and specialists and worried whispers. 4 years of Dante watching his boy disappear further and further into himself. Unreachable, untouchable, drowning in grief that no 9-year-old should have to carry. And now this woman, this exhausted, bleeding, stubborn waitress with holes in her shoes and fire in her eyes. She had broken through in a single night what years of effort could not. Elena looked at the drawing in her hands, then at Marco's tear-streaked face, then at Dante, standing rigid in the corner, a man made of stone watching his world shift beneath his feet. She saw the same pain in both of them, father and son, frozen in different ways by the same loss. One had turned to ice to survive. The other had simply stopped speaking, stopped reaching, stopped believing anyone would stay. Elena's heart made the decision before her mind could catch up. She reached out and pulled Marco onto the bed beside her, ignoring the sharp protest of her stitches. The boy came willingly, desperately, curling against her side like he had been waiting his whole life for permission. "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart." Elena smoothed his messy hair with gentle fingers. "Not yet. I'm right here." Marco looked up at her, eyes wide and disbelieving, and then he smiled. It was small, tentative, rusty from 4 years of disuse. But it was real. Dante made a sound. A sharp intake of breath, quickly suppressed, but Elena heard it. She saw the way his mask cracked, just for an instant, revealing something raw and bleeding underneath. Gratitude, fear, and something else. Something he clearly wasn't ready to name. Elena held Dante's gaze across the room. This broken boy pressed against her side, his drawing clutched in her hand like a sacred trust. She thought about Lily, alone and sick and waiting. She thought about Victor Crane and his threats. She thought about the mountain of debt crushing her slowly for years. She thought about 3 jobs and 4 hours of sleep in shoes with holes and a life spent surviving instead of living. Then she thought about this child who had given her wings in crayon and asked her not to disappear. "I have conditions," Elena said quietly. Dante's eyebrow rose. "You're hardly in a position to negotiate, Miss Marshall." Elena's chin lifted. "Do you want me to stay or not?" The room fell silent. Marco nestled closer against Elena's side, his small hand still gripping her sleeve as if afraid she might evaporate. Dante remained motionless by the window, his expression carved from marble, waiting. Elena took a breath. The movement pulled at her stitches, sending fire across her back, but she kept her voice steady. "First condition." She held up one finger. "Lily comes here. She gets the best medical care money can buy, and she stays with me. Not in some separate facility, not where I can't see her. With me." Dante inclined his head slightly. "Done." The speed of his agreement caught her off guard, but Elena pressed forward before she could lose momentum. "Second condition." Another finger raised. "I don't do anything illegal. I'm not part of your business. Not deliveries, not messages, not holding doors or looking the other way. Ever. I'm here for Marco. That's all." A flicker of something crossed Dante's face. Amusement, perhaps, or respect. Agreed. "Marco's companion has no involvement with family operations. You have my word." 2 conditions accepted without negotiation. Elena's heart hammered. The third was the dangerous one, the one that had been clawing at her mind since she woke up in silk sheets with a crime lord studying her like a puzzle he intended to solve. Third condition. Her voice dropped lower, steadier. "You don't touch me. This arrangement is professional. Strictly professional. I'm not one of your women. I'm not a mistress or a plaything or whatever you people call it. I work for you. That's where it ends." The temperature in the room shifted. Dante moved away from the window, each step slow, deliberate, predatory. The distance between them shrank until he stood at the edge of the bed, close enough that Elena could smell his cologne, something dark and rich, like aged whiskey and burning cedar. "You think you're my type?" His voice had dropped to something low and dangerous. Velvet wrapped around a blade. Elena refused to shrink back, refused to look away. "I think I need to be clear about boundaries, Mr. Romano." Dante leaned down. His face stopped inches from hers, so close she could see the individual flecks of darker black in his eyes, like shadows within shadows. So close she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin, despite the coldness of his expression. "My type," he murmured, "is women who know the game, women who understand the rules, women who don't bleed on my floors defending children they've never met." He paused, his gaze dropping briefly to her lips before snapping back to her eyes. "You're a civilian, Miss Marshall. A waitress with holes in her shoes and more courage than sense. You're safe from me." But even as the words left his mouth, Elena saw something flare in those bottomless black eyes, something hot and hungry that surfaced for just a heartbeat before he drowned it. She wasn't imagining it. She wasn't. Dante straightened abruptly, stepping back as if proximity to her had become physically uncomfortable. He adjusted his cufflinks with precise, controlled movements. When he spoke again, his voice had returned to ice. "Lily will arrive tomorrow morning. Dr. Vance will oversee her care personally. In the meantime, rest. You look like death warmed over, and I can't have Marco's new companion collapsing on her first day." He turned and walked toward the door. Elena watched him go, her heart still racing from whatever had just passed between them. Dante paused at the threshold, one hand on the ornate brass handle. He didn't turn around. "Welcome to the Romano family, Elena Marshall." A beat of silence. "Try not to die." The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow echoed like a gunshot. Elena released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her entire body sagged against the pillows, exhaustion and adrenaline warring in her veins. Beside her, Marco shifted. She looked down to find him smiling up at her, a knowing expression on his small face that seemed far too old for 9 years. "Papa likes you," he said matter-of-factly. Elena blinked. "What? He never talks that much." Marco snuggled closer, yawning. "Not to anyone. Not since Mommy went away, but he talked a lot to you." Elena didn't know what to say to that. She turned her head toward the window, watching the snow continue to fall over the manicured gardens below. Somewhere out there, beyond the gates and guards and walls, the city she knew was grinding on, the bakery opening without her, the diner scrambling to cover her shift. Victor Crane's deadline ticking closer with every passing hour. But in here, wrapped in silk sheets with a broken boy curled against her side, Elena felt the strangest sensation settle into her bones. Safety, or perhaps just its most dangerous illusion. She closed her eyes, Marco's drawing still clutched in her free hand, and wondered what kind of contract she had just signed, and with whom. 2 days later, Elena heard the crunch of tires on gravel and ran to the window. A private ambulance was pulling up the circular driveway, its sleek white body gleaming in the winter sunlight. 2 paramedics in crisp uniforms stepped out, moving to the rear doors with practiced efficiency. Elena didn't wait for the elevator. She flew down the marble staircase, ignoring the pull of stitches in her back, her bare feet slapping against cold stone. She burst through the front doors just as the paramedics were lowering a stretcher onto the snow-dusted ground. Lily lay bundled in blankets, her face pale and thin, dark circles carved beneath her eyes. The lupus had stolen so much from her in the past year. Her energy, her independence, the rosy flush that used to color her cheeks when she laughed. But when she saw Elena running toward her, she smiled. That smile hadn't changed. It was still sunshine breaking through storm clouds. "Lily." Elena collapsed beside the stretcher, gathering her sister into her arms as gently as she could. Tears streamed down her face, hot against the cold air. "Oh God, Lily, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I left you alone. I didn't mean to, Elena." Lily's voice was weak but warm. Her thin fingers came up to touch her sister's wet cheek. Are we in a castle?" Elena laughed through her tears. A hiccuping, soggy sound. Something like that. Lily's eyes drifted to the massive stone mansion behind them, to the manicured gardens buried under pristine snow, to the fountain frozen mid-spray like a sculpture of ice. "Am I dreaming?" Lily whispered. "Did I die? Is this heaven?" "Not heaven." Elena squeezed her sister's hand. "But close. You're going to be okay now, Lily. I promise. Everything's going to be okay." They moved Lily into a bedroom on the first floor, larger than their entire apartment in South Bronx. A private nurse was already waiting, along with medical equipment that looked like it belonged in a cutting-edge hospital. Fresh flowers sat on every surface, filling the room with color and fragrance. "Doctor." Vance appeared an hour later with news that made Elena's knees buckle. "Your sister has been moved to the top of the kidney transplant list," the doctor said matter-of-factly, as if announcing the weather. "We expect a match within the next 2 months. In the meantime, she'll receive the best care available." Elena understood what that meant. Dante Romano had made a phone call, pulled strings that regular people didn't even know existed, changed Lily's fate with nothing more than his name and his influence. She found him in the study that evening. He sat across from Marco at a chess table, the board between them scattered with ivory and ebony pieces. Late afternoon light slanted through tall windows, catching dust motes that floated lazily through the air. For once, Dante wasn't wearing a suit, just a simple black sweater that somehow made him look more human and more dangerous at the same time. Marco was frowning at the board with intense concentration, his small hand hovering over a knight. "Thank you," Elena said from the doorway. Dante didn't look up. "Don't thank me." He moved a pawn forward 2 spaces. "I'm paying a debt." Elena stepped into the room. "A debt for what?" Dante's hand paused over the board. Slowly, he raised his eyes to meet hers. Something flickered in those black depths, something complicated and painful and carefully guarded. For 4 years of silence, his voice was quiet. "Marco hasn't smiled since his mother died. He hasn't spoken more than 3 words to anyone outside this house. Therapists, specialists, family, friends. Nothing worked." He looked at his son, who was still studying the chess pieces with fierce determination. You gave him back his smile in a single night. Dante's gaze returned to Elena. That's not a debt money can repay. Before Elena could respond, Marco looked up and spotted her. His face lit up like a sunrise. Elena! He scrambled off his chair and grabbed her hand. Come play with us. I'll teach you. Papa always wins, but maybe if we team up Marco. Dante's voice held a warning note. Miss Marshall is still recovering. It's okay. Elena let Marco pull her toward the table. I'd like to learn. She settled into a chair beside the boy, watching him explain the pieces with animated enthusiasm. His small hands moved the knights and bishops, demonstrating their movements, occasionally glancing up to make sure she was paying attention. Dante watched them both, his expression unreadable. And Elena, for the first time in more years than she could count, felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Safety. Warmth. Home. But safety in the devil's den was a dangerous illusion. And illusions, like all beautiful things in Elena Marshall's life, never lasted long. 2 weeks dissolved like sugar in warm water. Elena found herself settling into a rhythm she never could have imagined. Mornings began with breakfast in the sun-drenched kitchen, Marco chattering beside her about whales and sharks and the mysterious creatures living in ocean trenches. Afternoons were spent in the library, surrounded by leather-bound books that smelled of history, reading stories about brave sailors and magical seas while snow drifted past the towering windows. They baked cookies that came out lopsided and oversweet. They painted watercolors that looked more like colorful accidents than art. They built blanket forts in Marco's bedroom and pretended they were explorers discovering underwater kingdoms. And slowly, piece by piece, Marco began to unfold. It happened on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. They were curled together on the library sofa. A book about marine biology opened between them, when Marco suddenly stopped turning pages. I saw it, he whispered. Elena felt him tense against her side. Saw what, sweetheart? When Mommy died. His voice was small, fragile. I was at the window. I heard the boom. I saw the car. It was on fire. So much fire. And Mommy was inside. Elena's heart cracked open. I screamed. Marco continued, his words tumbling out like water from a broken dam. I screamed and screamed, but no one could hear me. The fire was so big, so orange. And Mommy didn't get out. She never got out. Tears were streaming down his face now. 4 years of bottled grief finally finding release. Elena gathered him into her arms and held him tight. She didn't tell him to stop crying. She didn't say it would be okay. She simply held him and let him break, absorbing his sobs like a sponge absorbing rain. Dante would have told him to be strong. Dante would have reminded him that Romanos don't show weakness. But Elena wasn't a Romano. She was a girl who had lost both parents and knew that sometimes the only way to survive grief was to let it drown you first. Later that evening, Bruno Santini found Elena in the hallway outside Marco's room. The boy had cried himself to sleep, still clutching her hand, and she had only just managed to slip away. You're good for him, Bruno said quietly. His massive frame leaned against the wall, arms crossed, expression softer than Elena had ever seen it, better than any of those expensive shrinks the boss hired. Elena hugged herself against the evening chill. Can I ask you something? Bruno nodded. What was she like? Isabella? Something shifted in Bruno's weathered face. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a worn photograph, edges soft from years of handling. The woman in the picture was beautiful, dark hair cascading over bare shoulders, brown eyes warm with laughter, a smile that seemed to radiate light. She held a toddler Marco in her arms, pressing a kiss to his chubby cheek. She was the light of this house, Bruno said. When she walked into a room, everything got brighter. She made the boss laugh. Actually laugh. Can you imagine? Elena couldn't. What happened? Bruno's jaw tightened. The bomb was meant for him. Some rival family trying to make a statement. But Isabella took his car that morning. Hers had a flat tire. Wrong place. Wrong time. He paused. Wrong everything. Elena stared at the photograph. He blames himself. Every single day. Bruno took the picture back, tucking it carefully into his pocket. After she died, he changed. The man who used to dance with his wife in the kitchen, who read bedtime stories and made pancakes on Sundays. That man died in the fire too. What came out of the ashes was Il Diavolo. He looked at Elena with knowing eyes. The devil was easier to be than a grieving husband. That night, unable to sleep, Elena wandered to the window of her bedroom. The snow had stopped falling, leaving the garden below transformed into a moonlit wonderland. Every surface sparkled silver and white, untouched and perfect. And there, standing alone among the frozen roses, was Dante Romano, He wore no coat despite the bitter cold. His face was tilted upward, staring at the star-scattered sky. His shoulders were bowed with a weight only he could feel. His hands hung empty at his sides. He looked like a man praying to a god he no longer believed in. He looked like a man waiting for forgiveness that would never come. Elena pressed her palm against the cold glass. She didn't go to him. She knew, somehow, that he wouldn't want her to see this private grief, this silent vigil for a woman made of ashes and memory. But watching him stand there, carved from ice and moonlight, she began to understand something she hadn't before. Dante Romano wasn't a monster. He was a man who had broken so completely that he'd rebuilt himself from stone just to survive. A man who hid behind cruelty because kindness had cost him everything. A man pretending to be made of rock when he was really made of shattered glass. And for reasons Elena couldn't explain, that understanding terrified her more than his darkness ever had. The blizzard came without warning. One moment the night was still, snow falling in gentle curtains. The next, wind howled around the mansion like a living thing, rattling windows and screaming through cracks. Trees bent nearly horizontal under the assault. The power flickered twice before settling into an uneasy truce with the storm. Elena lay awake listening to the chaos outside, unable to quiet her mind. The conversation with Bruno kept replaying, the photograph of Isabella, the image of Dante standing alone in the frozen garden. Then she heard it. A scream, high-pitched, terrified, coming from down the hall. "Mommy, fire, fire, Mommy, please." Elena was out of bed before she finished processing the sound. Her bare feet slapped against cold marble as she sprinted toward Marco's room. The stitches in her back pulled painfully, but she didn't slow. She burst through his door to find the boy thrashing in his bed, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets. His eyes were squeezed shut, hands clawing at invisible flames. His small body convulsed with the force of his sobs. "No, Mommy, don't leave me." "Mommy." Elena climbed onto the bed and gathered him into her arms. Marco, sweetheart, wake up. It's Elena. You're safe. You're home. There's no fire." He fought at first, still trapped in the nightmare. His fists struck her chest, her arms, her healing back. The pain was blinding, but she didn't let go. "I'm here," she whispered into his hair. "I'm right here. The fire is gone. It's just a storm. Listen. Hear the wind? It's just wind and snow. Nothing else. Nothing is burning." Slowly, his struggles weakened. His screams faded into whimpers, then into shuddering breaths. His fingers unclenched from her nightgown and wrapped around her instead, clinging like she was the only solid thing in a dissolving world. Elena rocked him gently, humming a lullaby her mother used to sing. She stroked his damp hair and wiped the tears from his cheeks. She held him through the aftershocks, through the hiccups, through the gradual loosening of terror's grip. She didn't know how long they stayed that way. Minutes, hours, time lost meaning in the darkness. Eventually, Marco's breathing evened out. His body went heavy against hers. His grip relaxed into the loose hold of deep sleep. Elena carefully lowered him back onto the pillows. She tucked the blankets around his small form, brushed a kiss across his forehead. When she turned toward the door, her heart stopped. Dante stood in the doorway. He was dressed in black silk pajama pants and nothing else. His chest was bare, revealing the hard planes of muscle she had only imagined beneath his tailored suits. But it was his face that made her breath catch. His eyes were red-rimmed, raw. His jaw was clenched so tight she could see the veins pulsing in his neck. He looked like a man who had been standing there watching for a long time, a man who had wanted to move but couldn't remember how. Elena slipped out of Marco's room and pulled the door softly closed behind her. The hallway was dark, save for the occasional flash of lightning through distant windows. They stood facing each other, two shadows in the storm. "You didn't have to do that." Dante's voice was rough, scraped hollow. "He needed someone. I was coming." Elena met his gaze without flinching. "You're always coming, Dante, but you never arrive." He went rigid. "What's that supposed to mean?" Elena stepped closer. Something reckless was building in her chest, fueled by exhaustion and emotion, and 2 weeks of watching this broken family stumble around their grief like it was furniture they couldn't move. "It means you stand in shadows watching him. You give him everything money can buy. Toys, tutors, the best doctors. But you don't give him the one thing he actually needs." "And what's that?" Dante's voice was dangerous now, a warning she chose to ignore. "To know it's okay to be weak." Elena's voice rose. "To cry, to fall apart, to be a child instead of a tiny soldier carrying a grief too big for grown men." Dante moved. One moment he was 3 feet away. The next, he had her pressed against the wall, his palms flat on either side of her head. His body radiated heat despite the cold hallway. His face was inches from hers, close enough that she could see the individual flecks of amber hidden in his black eyes. "You think you understand my son?" His breath was hot against her lips. "You think you understand my life? You've been here 2 weeks." Elena's heart hammered, but she refused to look away. "I understand pain," she said quietly. "I understand being alone in a crowd. I understand building walls so high you forget there was ever anything on the other side. I understand pretending to be strong when you're falling apart inside." Something cracked in Dante's expression. His gaze dropped to her mouth, lingered, burned. The air between them turned to gasoline, waiting for a spark. Elena could feel his heartbeat through his bare chest, pressed so close to hers. She could feel the war raging behind his eyes. The want fighting the fear, fighting the guilt, fighting 4 years of carefully constructed walls. 1 inch. That's all it would take. 1 inch and his lips would be on hers. Dante's hand lifted from the wall. His fingers brushed her jaw, feather-light, trembling. Then he stepped back. The cold rushed in to fill the space where his heat had been. "Go to sleep, Elena." His voice was gravel. "You're overstepping." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness at the end of the hall. But Elena saw what he didn't want her to see. His hands were shaking. She leaned against the wall, heart pounding, skin still burning where he had touched her. She had done something dangerous tonight. She had reached past the devil's armor and touched the bleeding man underneath. And the devil had no idea what to do with that. Morning came gray and heavy, the aftermath of the blizzard leaving the world muffled and still. Elena sat at the kitchen table with Marco, helping him spread jam on toast while trying not to think about the night before. About Dante's hands on the wall beside her head, about the almost kiss that hung between them like smoke. The normalcy shattered when Bruno walked in. His face was the color of old ash. His massive hands gripped a cardboard box like it contained a bomb. Which, in a way, it did. "Boss needs to see this." Bruno's voice was flat. "Dead." "You too, Miss Marshall." Elena's stomach dropped. They found Dante in his study, standing behind his desk like a general awaiting battle reports. He took the box from Bruno without expression and set it on the polished mahogany surface. "This arrived at the gate 10 minutes ago," Bruno said. "No return address. No witnesses. Just left in the snow." Dante opened the box. Elena's world tilted sideways. Inside, nestled on a bed of white tissue paper, lay a doll, an old one, with yarn hair and a faded gingham dress. A doll Elena recognized instantly because she had slept with it every night until she was 12. A doll she had given to Lily when their mother died, passing on the only comfort she had left to offer. A doll that should have been in their apartment in South Bronx. But it wasn't the same anymore. Someone had taken a knife to it. The yarn hair was hacked off in jagged clumps. The button eyes had been gouged out, leaving ragged holes. The soft cloth body had been sliced open and stuffed with something wet and red that looked sickeningly like blood. Crimson paint oozed from the wounds, staining the white tissue paper beneath. A note was pinned to what remained of the dress. Typed, clinical, terrifying. "Return the girl, or the sister dies next. NP." Elena couldn't breathe. "They broke into my apartment." Her voice came from somewhere far away. "They know about Lily. They know where she was. They know she's here now." The room spun. Lily, her baby sister. The only family she had left. The person she had sacrificed everything to protect. Elena ran. She sprinted through the halls, barely registering the startled servants who jumped out of her path. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for escape. Worst-case scenarios played through her mind in vivid, horrifying detail. She rounded the corner to Lily's room and nearly collapsed with relief. 2 guards stood flanking the door, hands resting on concealed weapons. Through the crack in the doorway, Elena could see her sister sleeping peacefully, morning light painting gentle shadows across her thin face. Safe. She was safe. Elena pressed her forehead against the wall and tried to remember how to breathe. A hand closed around her arm. She spun to find Dante behind her. His face was carved from marble, expressionless and hard. But his eyes burned with something she had never seen there before. Without a word, he pulled her down the hall and into his private study. The door clicked shut behind them with the finality of a coffin lid. Nikolai Petrov. Dante released her arm and moved to the window, staring out at the snow-covered grounds. Russian Mafia. He's been trying to expand into my territory for years. We had an understanding, a truce. But apparently that's over now. Elena's hands were shaking. Why me? Why Lily? We're nobody. Because you're connected to me now. Dante turned to face her. Petrov knows about the restaurant, about what you did for Marco. In his mind, that makes you leverage. Then I need to leave. Elena's voice cracked. I'm putting everyone in danger. Marco, Lily, your whole family. If I just go, you leave now, you're dead before sunset. Dante's voice was ice. You and your sister both. Petrov doesn't let witnesses live. He doesn't let loose ends breathe. The moment you step outside my protection, he'll take you, and he won't be gentle about it. Elena felt the walls closing in. Then what do I do? The words came out broken, desperate. The voice of a woman who had spent her whole life fighting alone and suddenly had nowhere left to run. Dante crossed the room in 3 strides. He took her hands in his. His palms were warm, rough with calluses, impossibly gentle. He held her gaze with an intensity that made her forget how to think. You trust me. 3 words, simple, impossible. Elena looked into the eyes of the devil and saw something she never expected to find there. Fear. Real, raw, undisguised fear. Not for himself. Dante Romano wasn't afraid of Nikolai Petrov or any other enemy who might come for his blood. He was afraid for her, and that terrified Elena more than any bloody doll ever could. Elena stared at their joined hands, her mind racing through impossible calculations. Trust the devil. As if it were that simple. As if her entire life hadn't taught her that trust was a currency she couldn't afford. How? The question scraped out raw. How do I trust you when I don't even know what you're planning? Dante released her hands and walked to his desk. He opened a drawer and withdrew a thick folder, spreading its contents across the polished surface. Photographs, maps, documents covered in neat typescript. Petrov expects me to hide you, Dante said, his finger tracing a line on one of the maps. He expects me to tuck you away in some safe house and wait for him to strike. That's what he wants. He's counting on my fear to make me predictable. So what do you do instead? Dante looked up, something dark and calculating, glittering in his eyes. I do the opposite. Instead of hiding you, I show you off. I put you on display where everyone can see. I make Petrov believe you're exactly what he thinks you are. Elena frowned. And what does he think I am? My weakness. Dante's voice dropped lower. He thinks I'm hiding you because I'm ashamed. Or scared. Because you're some dirty secret I can't afford to expose. He moved around the desk, each step deliberate, predatory. So tomorrow night, at the governor's charity gala, I'm going to show him the truth. Elena's pulse quickened. What truth? Dante stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. His hand rose slowly, deliberately, and his fingers caught her chin, tilting her face toward the light. That you're not a weakness. His thumb brushed the edge of her jaw. You're the queen on my chessboard, and I'm going to use you to draw the king out of hiding so I can kill him. The words should have terrified her. The casual mention of murder, the cold calculation behind his strategy. But all Elena could focus on was the heat of his touch and the strange electricity humming between them. I'm bait, she said flatly. You're a weapon. Dante's eyes never left hers. There's a difference. Bait gets eaten. Weapons destroy. Elena pulled her chin from his grasp, needing distance to think clearly. She walked to the window, staring out at the snow-covered gardens without really seeing them. Her mind churned through options, searching for alternatives, escape routes, anything that didn't involve walking into a room full of wolves wearing a target on her back. There were none. Running meant death. Hiding meant waiting for death. The only path forward led through Nikolai Petrov and whatever horrors he had planned. At least this way, she had some control. At least this way, she wasn't cowering in a corner waiting for the axe to fall. If I do this, Elena said without turning around, you swear Lily stays safe. No matter what happens to me, no matter how tomorrow night ends, you swear on your son's life that my sister lives. Silence stretched behind her. Then footsteps. Close, closer. Dante's reflection appeared in the window glass, standing just behind her shoulder. His expression was unreadable, but something flickered in his dark eyes. Something that looked almost like admiration. Nothing will happen to you. His voice was low, certain. I don't lose what's mine. Elena turned to face him. I'm not yours. The words came out sharper than she intended. A reflex. A defense mechanism built from years of belonging to no one. Of being passed from foster home to foster home like unwanted furniture. Dante didn't flinch. Instead, slowly, impossibly, the corner of his mouth curved upward. A smile. The first real smile Elena had ever seen on his face. It transformed him. Softened the granite edges. Made him look almost human. Almost dangerous in an entirely different way. Not yet, he said quietly. The two words hung in the air between them, heavy with promise and threat, and something Elena didn't dare name. Dante turned and strode toward the door. "I'll have someone bring dresses for you to choose from," he called over his shoulder. "Jewels, too. Tomorrow night, you'll look like you belong at my side, like you've always belonged there." The door opened. "Bruno will brief you on security protocols. Stay close to me at all times. Don't wander off. Don't accept drinks from anyone except me." He paused at the threshold, glancing back. "And Elena, whatever happens tomorrow, whatever you see me do, remember, the devil always protects what's his." Then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him. Elena stood alone in the study, heart pounding, skin still tingling where his fingers had touched her chin. Not yet. 2 words, 2 syllables. And yet they echoed through her head like a prophecy she couldn't escape. When had she stopped being afraid of belonging to him? When had she started wondering what it would feel like to let him claim her completely? She pressed her palms against her burning cheeks and stared at the closed door. Somewhere along the way, between the bloody glass and the almost kiss, and the broken boy who called her his angel, Elena Marshall had started to fall, and she had no idea how to stop. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of preparation. A team of stylists descended on the mansion like an invading army. They brought racks of gowns and garment bags, cases of jewelry that glittered under the lights, enough makeup and hair products to stock a department store. Elena sat through hours of fittings and consultations, feeling like a doll being dressed for display. Dante had chosen the dress himself. It arrived in a black box tied with crimson ribbon, no label visible anywhere. When Elena lifted the lid and pushed aside the tissue paper, her breath caught. Deep red silk spilled through her fingers like liquid fire. The gown was a masterpiece of dangerous elegance, a plunging neckline that skimmed the edge of scandalous, a back that dipped low enough to reveal the curve of her spine, a slit that climbed her thigh to heights that made her cheeks flush. It was the kind of dress that started wars. The stylists worked their magic through the afternoon. They pinned her hair into an elaborate updo, leaving a few tendrils to frame her face. They painted her lips the same crimson as the dress. They dusted gold across her cheekbones and lined her eyes with black that made them appear larger, more luminous. Finally, they fastened the necklace. Diamonds cascaded down her throat in a waterfall of fire and ice. Each stone was flawless, catching the light and fracturing it into rainbows. The piece was heavy against her collarbone, a weight that felt like both armor and chains. "The Romano family heirloom," one stylist whispered reverently. Mrs. Isabella wore it on her wedding day. Elena's stomach clenched. When the team finally stepped back, Elena turned to face the full-length mirror. A stranger stared back. The woman in the reflection was beautiful, polished, powerful. She looked like she belonged in magazine spreads and red carpets, not cramped apartments and grease-stained kitchens. She looked like the kind of woman who had never worked 3 jobs or worried about paying rent or eaten ramen for dinner 5 nights in a row. She looked like a queen. Elena didn't recognize herself at all. "Oh my God." The whisper came from the doorway. Lily sat in a wheelchair, pushed by her private nurse, her thin face glowing with wonder. "Elena." Lily's eyes were round as full moons. "You look like a princess, a real princess from a fairy tale." Elena's smile came out crooked, fragile. A princess walking into a dragon's lair. Lily reached out and squeezed her sister's hand. "Then burn them all down, sis." Small footsteps pounded down the hallway. Marco burst through the door, breathless from running. He skidded to a stop when he saw Elena, his sneakers squeaking against the marble floor. His face went pale. "You look like Mommy," he whispered. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Marco stepped closer, his small hands trembling at his sides. "Mommy wore red too. The night His voice cracked. "The night she went away. She was so pretty. She kissed me goodbye. She said she'd be back soon." Tears welled in his eyes. She never came back. Elena dropped to her knees, heedless of the expensive silk pooling around her. She gathered Marco into her arms and held him tight, pressing her cheek against his hair. "I'll come back, sweetheart." She poured every ounce of conviction she possessed into the words. "I promise you, I'll come back." Marco's arms wrapped around her neck. "Swear it," he demanded, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "Swear on the angels." "I swear on the angels." Elena kissed his forehead. "I swear on every star in the sky. I'm coming home to you." A shadow fell across the doorway. Elena looked up. Dante stood frozen at the threshold, one hand braced against the frame as if he needed support to remain standing. He wore a black tuxedo that fit him like it had been sewn directly onto his body. His hair was swept back, his jaw freshly shaved, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. But Elena barely noticed any of that. Because his eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that stopped her heart. Something raw flickered across his face. Something hungry and desperate and barely controlled. His jaw tightened. His hand on the doorframe clenched until his knuckles went white. He looked at her like she was salvation and damnation wrapped in red silk. "Let's go." The words came out rough, hoarse, like he had to force them past something lodged in his throat. Elena pressed one final kiss to Marco's hair and rose gracefully to her feet. The car ride was silent. Dante sat beside her in the back of the limousine, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He didn't look at her, didn't speak, but his arms stretched along the seat behind her shoulders, his fingers occasionally brushing the bare skin of her back. Each touch sent electricity sparking down her spine. "If anything happens tonight," Dante said suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence, "you stay behind me. You don't run. You don't try to help. You don't play hero. Understood?" Elena turned her head to look at him. "I don't take orders." Dante finally met her eyes. The look in them made her breath catch. Possessive, protective, predatory. "Tonight, you do." His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, "Or I'll chain you to that seat myself." Before Elena could respond, the limousine slowed to a stop. Through the tinted windows, she could see the Plaza Hotel blazing with light. A red carpet stretched from the entrance to the street, lined with photographers and journalists. Camera flashes exploded like lightning, capturing the arrival of New York's elite. Dante straightened his cuffs and reached for the door handle. "Remember, Elena." His eyes found hers one last time. "You're not bait. You're not prey. You're the queen. Walk like you own them all." The door opened. The night swallowed them whole. The moment they stepped through the gilded doors, the ballroom fell silent. Hundreds of heads turned in unison. Conversations died mid-sentence. Champagne glasses paused halfway to painted lips. Even the orchestra seemed to stumble, a violin hitting a wrong note before recovering. Elena felt the weight of every gaze like a physical pressure against her skin. The whispers began almost immediately, spreading through the crowd like wildfire through dry grass. "Is that Romano? Who is she? I've never seen her before. She's wearing the Isabella necklace, his wife's necklace. My God." Dante's hand pressed firmly against the small of her back, guiding her forward. His touch was warm through the thin silk, possessive and grounding. He walked with the easy confidence of a man who owned every room he entered. And tonight, he wanted everyone to know that he owned her too. They moved through the sea of tuxedos and designer gowns like a ship cutting through water. Dante introduced her to senators who shook her hand with practiced smiles, to federal judges who nodded with barely concealed curiosity, to tech billionaires and media moguls and old money aristocrats whose names Elena recognized from magazine covers. Through it all, Dante's hand never left her body. Her waist, her hip, the curve of her lower back. He touched her constantly, casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world, like she had always belonged at his side, marking his territory. And Elena discovered something surprising about herself. She wasn't afraid. Years of foster homes had taught her to read rooms, to sense danger, to adapt her face and voice to whatever situation demanded. Years of serving wealthy customers had taught her that rich people were just as petty and insecure as everyone else, just better dressed. She wore her mask like armor and met every curious gaze without flinching. The orchestra struck up a waltz. Dante led her onto the dance floor without asking, pulling her into his arms with practiced ease. One hand settled on her waist. The other captured her fingers. They began to move. He was an excellent dancer. Of course he was. He guided her through the steps effortlessly, spinning her across the polished floor like they had been partners for years. "You're not scared," Dante murmured, his lips close to her ear. "Should I be? Most people would be." Surrounded by wolves in a room full of teeth, Elena tilted her head back to meet his eyes. "I've faced worse than rich people in fancy clothes, Mr. Romano. I've been evicted in February with nowhere to go. I've worked double shifts on 3 hours of sleep. I've held my dying mother's hand while debt collectors called my phone. She let him spin her, the red dress flaring around her legs like flames. These people don't scare me. They're just bullies in better suits." Something shifted in Dante's expression. The perpetual hardness softened by a fraction. His eyes traveled over her face like he was seeing her for the first time. "You continue to surprise me, Elena Marshall. Is that a compliment?" "It's a warning." His arm tightened around her waist. "I don't like surprises." "Then you shouldn't have brought me here." The hint of a smile played at the corner of his mouth. Before he could respond, a voice cut through the music like a blade through silk. "Dante Romano. What a pleasant surprise." The smile vanished from Dante's face. They stopped dancing, A man emerged from the crowd, and Elena understood immediately why people feared the Russian Mafia. Nikolai Petrov was tall, nearly as tall as Dante, but broader, older. His hair was silver white, swept back from a face that might have been handsome once, but had hardened into something cruel. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, with the cold, flat stare of a snake watching a mouse. He wore a white tuxedo that stood out obscenely among the sea of black, as if he wanted everyone to know he played by different rules. 2 massive bodyguards flanked him, their bulk barely contained by straining suit jackets. Nikolai. Dante's voice was ice. I didn't know they let rats into the plaza. Petrov laughed, a wet, unpleasant sound. Always so hostile, Dante. And here I thought we were friends. His pale eyes slid to Elena, crawling over her body with undisguised hunger. But I can see why you've been distracted lately. He stepped closer. Elena held her ground. So this is the famous Waitress. Petrov circled her slowly, like a predator examining prey. The angel of the Romanos. The woman brave enough to bleed for a child she didn't know. He stopped behind her, close enough that she could feel his breath on her bare shoulder. He leaned in and inhaled deeply, smelling her hair like a sommelier sampling wine. Every instinct screamed at Elena to run. She didn't move. Such a pretty thing, Petrov murmured. Dante always did have excellent taste in women. Isabella was beautiful too. His voice dropped to a whisper meant only for her. Shame how that ended, and shame how this will end too. Elena turned her head slowly, meeting those snake eyes without flinching. Mr. Petrov. Her voice came out steady, clear, cold. I've cleaned up bigger messes than you. I've scrubbed toilets that were less full of shit. So don't underestimate waitresses. We know how to deal with garbage. Silence crashed over them like a wave. Petrov's face went blank with shock. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his features. It didn't reach his eyes. Oh, I like her, Dante. He stepped back, straightening his white jacket. Fire and spirit. It will make breaking her so much more satisfying. Dante moved between them, his body a wall of barely contained violence. Walk away, Nikolai. While you still can. Petrov just laughed. Enjoy the party, Dante. He was already retreating into the crowd, his bodyguards falling into step behind him. It might be your last. Then he was gone, swallowed by the sea of glittering guests. Dante's hand found Elena's again, gripping tight enough to hurt. He's planning something, she said quietly. Yes. Tonight? Dante's jaw tightened. Yes. Dante pulled Elena away from the dance floor, his grip on her wrist tight enough to leave marks. They wove through clusters of oblivious socialites, past champagne towers and ice sculptures, until they reached a shadowed alcove near the emergency exit. He's planning something tonight. Dante's voice was low, urgent. Stay close to me. Don't wander. Don't accept anything from anyone. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. What did he mean? Your last. Dante didn't answer. His eyes swept the ballroom with predatory focus, tracking movement, cataloging faces, calculating distances. She watched him assess the grand staircase, the service doors, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. He wasn't looking at the party anymore. He was mapping escape routes. Understanding hit her like ice water. You're looking for shooters. Dante's jaw tightened. How many? Elena pressed. At least 3. Maybe more. Petrov doesn't do anything small. And you still brought me here? Her voice rose before she could stop it. Knowing there would be assassins? Dante finally looked at her. His dark eyes held no apology. This is the only way to end it, Elena. Petrov won't stop. He'll keep coming. Keep threatening. Keep sending bloody dolls and death notes. He'll burn down everything I've built and everyone I love until there's nothing left. His hand found hers, fingers interlacing. Tonight, one of us dies. That's the only way this ends. The orchestra launched into a new waltz, bright and cheerful, grotesquely inappropriate for the violence hovering in the air. Dante pulled Elena back toward the dance floor. We keep moving, he murmured against her hair. Moving targets are harder to hit. They swayed together among the other couples, a perfect picture of elegance and romance. But Elena could feel the tension coiled in Dante's muscles, could see his eyes constantly scanning over her shoulder. If I don't make it tonight, Dante said suddenly, his voice barely audible above the music. Elena's blood turned to ice. Don't, Elena, don't you dare. She gripped his shoulders tighter, nails digging into expensive fabric. Don't you dare say goodbye to me on a dance floor. Dante looked down at her, and for one impossible moment, the mask cracked completely. She saw the man beneath. The grieving widower, the terrified father, the lonely king drowning in a kingdom he never wanted. Take care of Marco. The words came out rough, broken. He needs someone who sees him, someone who holds him when he cries instead of telling him to be strong. He needs his father. Elena's eyes burned. So you're going to survive tonight, and you're going to go home to your son, and you're going to be there for him. Do you understand me? Something flickered across Dante's face. Wonder, gratitude, and something deeper. Something that looked terrifyingly like love. You really aren't afraid of me, are you? I'm afraid of losing you. The confession slipped out before Elena could stop it. That's different. Dante's hand rose to her face. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, impossibly gentle for a man who dealt in death. Elena bang. The champagne glass on the table beside them exploded. Crystal shards erupted outward like shrapnel. Champagne sprayed across Elena's arm. A woman nearby screamed. Time stopped. Then everything happened at once. Dante tackled Elena to the ground, his body slamming over hers like a human shield. They hit the marble floor hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs. His weight pressed her down, covered her completely. Above them, chaos erupted. More gunshots cracked through the air. Glass shattered, tables overturned. The orchestra collapsed into discordant noise as musicians dove for cover. Hundreds of voices screamed in unified terror, the sound drowning out everything else. "Stay down!" Dante's roar cut through the pandemonium. Elena couldn't move even if she wanted to. He had her pinned beneath him, his arms caging her head, his body absorbing any bullet that might find its way toward her. Through the forest of trampling legs and falling bodies, she caught a glimpse of the mezzanine above, a figure in black, a rifle, a muzzle flash. The bullet meant for her punched into the floor inches from her head, spraying marble chips across her face. Dante's hand found his holster. "When I move," he said against her ear, "you run for the kitchen. Don't stop. Don't look back. Dante, promise me." Another shot, screaming. The sounds of bodies hitting the floor. Elena grabbed the lapels of his tuxedo and pulled his face down to hers. "I'm not leaving you." Dante's eyes blazed. "Damn it, Elena. Together or not at all." Her voice shook but didn't break. "That's the deal. Take it or leave it." For one eternal second, they stared at each other while the world burned around them. Then Dante kissed her forehead, hard and fast. A promise and a prayer. "Then stay behind me, and try not to die." He surged to his feet, gun drawn, pulling her up with him. The hunt had begun. The ballroom had become a war zone. Tables lay overturned, their white linens stained with spilled wine and broken glass. Chairs scattered like fallen soldiers. The magnificent ice sculpture had toppled and shattered, sending frozen shards skittering across the blood-slicked marble. Guests stampeded toward exits, trampling each other in blind panic, their designer gowns and tailored tuxedos torn and soiled. Dante moved through the chaos like a shark through churning water. His gun came up. One shot, clean, precise. The sniper on the mezzanine jerked backward, rifle spinning from dead fingers, body tumbling over the railing to crash onto a dessert table below. "Kitchen! Now!" Dante's hand locked around Elena's wrist, and they ran. Bruno materialized from the crowd, his massive frame carving a path through the fleeing guests. Two more of Dante's men flanked them, guns drawn, eyes scanning for threats. They pushed against the current of panicked bodies. Elbows struck Elena's ribs. A woman's stiletto heel came down on her foot. Someone's champagne glass shattered against her shoulder, adding to the stains already ruining her crimson dress. A gunshot cracked behind them. One of the bodyguards grunted and stumbled. Blood erupted from his chest, spraying hot and wet across Elena's back. She felt the warmth soak through the silk, felt the iron smell fill her nostrils. He hit the ground and didn't get up. "Keep moving!" Bruno shoved her forward. They burst through the kitchen doors into a nightmare of stainless steel and fluorescent lights. Chefs cowered beneath prep tables. A pot of something boiled over on the stove, steam hissing into the air. Knives lay scattered across the floor where they'd been dropped in panic. Dante didn't slow. He led them past the walk-in freezers, past the dishwashing station, past racks of gleaming pots and pans, toward the back exit that would lead to the service alley. He kicked the door open and stopped. The alley stretched before them, narrow and dark, brick walls rising on either side like the walls of a tomb. Dumpsters lined one edge, fire escapes zigzagged overhead. Snow drifted down through the amber glow of a single streetlight. 3 men stood blocking the exit. They wore black tactical gear. Balaclavas covered their faces. Submachine guns hung from straps across their chests. Muzzles pointed directly at Dante's heart. And in the center, illuminated by the falling snow like a demon in a snow globe, stood Nikolai Petrov. He had removed his white tuxedo jacket. His sleeves were rolled up. A fat cigar smoldered between his fingers, the cherry glowing orange in the darkness. End of the line, Dante. Petrov's smile was the smile of a man who had already won. I have to admit, you lasted longer than I expected, but all games must end eventually. Dante pushed Elena behind him. She felt him check his gun, heard the soft click as he counted rounds. 4 bullets, 4 targets. No margin for error, Elena. His voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. The voice of a man who had made peace with death. When I start shooting, you run back inside. Find Bruno. Get to the car. Don't stop. Don't look back. No, that wasn't a request. Elena grabbed his arm and spun him to face her. I'm not leaving you. Dante's jaw clenched. Something cracked in his expression, the stone facade crumbling to reveal the raw, bleeding thing beneath. Marco needs one of us alive. His voice broke on his son's name. Let it be you. Take care of him. Tell him I'm sorry I wasn't better. Tell him his mother loved him. Tell him yourself. Elena's eyes burned. Because you're not dying tonight. Elena, no. She grabbed his face between her palms, forcing him to look at her. You don't get to give up. You don't get to walk into those bullets and leave me to explain to your son why his father never came home. You promised me. Together or not at all, Petrov laughed from the mouth of the alley. How touching. Young love. It almost makes me feel guilty for what comes next. He raised his hand, signaling his men. Almost. Dante pulled Elena's hands from his face. He held them for a moment, his thumbs brushing across her knuckles, memorizing the feel of her skin. Then he leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead. The kiss was soft, gentle, unbearably tender. The kiss of a man saying goodbye to the only light he'd found in 4 years of darkness. Forgive me, he whispered against her skin. Then Dante Romano released her hands, turned his back on the woman he loved, and walked toward his execution. Elena watched him go. 1 step, 2, 3. His gun hung at his side. His shoulders were square. His head was high. He was going to die. He knew it. She knew it. Everyone in that alley knew it. 4 bullets, 4 targets. Even if he was perfect, even if every shot found its mark, the time between the first trigger pull and the last would be more than enough for return fire. Dante Romano was walking toward certain death, and Elena Marshall realized, with crystalline clarity, that she could not let that happen. She had spent 28 years surviving, keeping her head down, not making waves, letting the world push her around because fighting back was too dangerous, too costly, too likely to end in pain. But some things were worth fighting for. Some people were worth dying for. Elena looked at the ground, at the fallen bodyguard just inside the kitchen door, at the gun still clutched in his lifeless hand. And she made her choice. Dante moved like lightning. His gun came up and he fired twice in rapid succession. 2 shots, 2 bodies hitting the snow-covered pavement. The first gunman dropped with a hole between his eyes. The second spun sideways, clutching his throat, blood spraying black in the amber streetlight. But the third was already aiming. Dante pulled the trigger again. Click. Empty. The gunman smiled behind his balaclava. His submachine gun rose, the muzzle centering on Dante's chest. Say goodbye, Il Diavolo. Petrov's voice dripped with satisfaction. He took a long drag on his cigar, savoring the moment. I'm going to enjoy telling your son how his father begged at the end. Dante didn't beg. He didn't run. He stood tall in the falling snow, facing death the way he had faced everything else in his life. With cold defiance and unbreakable pride. Elena's hand closed around cold steel. The dead bodyguard's gun was heavier than she expected. Her fingers fumbled with the grip, slippery with blood and sweat. She had never held a weapon before, never fired one, never imagined she would need to. But she had spent 28 years learning one lesson above all others. You fight for what you love, or you lose it forever. Elena stepped out of the kitchen doorway. Hey! The scream tore from her throat, raw and desperate. Every head in the alley turned. The third gunman's eyes widened behind his mask. He stared at the woman in the blood-soaked red dress, standing in the snow with a gun clutched in both trembling hands. She looked like a vengeful goddess, like a crimson flame burning against the darkness. Elena pulled the trigger. The recoil nearly knocked her off her feet. The shot went wide, sparking off the brick wall inches from the gunman's head. She missed, but it didn't matter. That 1 second of distraction was all Dante needed. He exploded into motion. His hand shot to his sleeve and emerged with a blade, the metal gleaming as it caught the light. He crossed the distance in 2 strides and drove the knife into the gunman's throat with surgical precision. Blood sprayed hot across Dante's face. The body crumpled. Petrov stumbled backward, his cigar falling from numb fingers. His hand dove into his jacket and came out with a pistol. You think this changes anything? Petrov's voice had gone shrill. Desperate. You think you've won? He aimed at Dante and pulled the trigger. Click. Nothing. Petrov stared at the gun in his hand, pulled the trigger again, and again. Click, click, click. His face went white as fresh snow. Jammed weapons are so unreliable, a voice called from the shadows. Especially when someone replaces the firing pin with a faulty one. A figure emerged from behind the dumpsters at the far end of the alley. Luka Morozov, Petrov's underboss, his most trusted lieutenant, the man who had stood at his right hand for 15 years. He walked toward them with casual ease, hands in his pockets, a thin smile playing on his lips. Luka? Petrov's voice cracked. What is this? What are you doing? Luka stopped beside Dante and shrugged. Business, Nikolai. Just business. He pulled a cigarette from his pocket and lit it, the flame briefly illuminating his scarred face. Romano made me a better offer. Your territory, your connections, your seat at the table. All I had to do was make sure your gun didn't work when you needed it most. Petrov's face contorted with rage and betrayal. I made you! Spittle flew from his lips. I pulled you out of the gutter. I gave you everything. And now I'm taking it back. Luka exhaled a stream of smoke. Nothing personal. You were a good boss. But Romano is better. And I'm tired of being second. Petrov lunged. Dante caught him. One hand closed around Petrov's throat. The other still held the bloody knife. You threatened my son. Dante's voice was quiet, calm, terrifying. You sent bloody dolls to terrorize an innocent woman. You tried to take everything from me. He leaned close, his lips nearly touching Petrov's ear. Now I'm going to take everything from you. Petrov's eyes, wide and wild, found Elena across the alley. She still stood in the doorway, gun hanging at her side, snow settling on her hair and shoulders. She's going to watch you die, Petrov hissed. She'll see what kind of monster you really are, and she'll never look at you the same way again. Dante glanced at Elena. Their eyes met through the falling snow. She saw the question there, the fear. Not fear of Petrov, fear of her. Fear that she would finally see the devil beneath the man and run screaming into the night. Elena lifted her chin. She didn't look away. Dante turned back to Petrov. You're wrong, he said softly. She already knows exactly what I am. The knife moved. Petrov made a wet gurgling sound. And then there was only silence and snow and the distant wail of approaching sirens. Nikolai Petrov lay motionless in the snow. His blood spread beneath him in a dark pool, steaming faintly in the cold night air. His pale eyes stared sightlessly at the falling snowflakes, frozen forever in an expression of shock and betrayal. The cigar he had dropped still smoldered nearby, a thin trail of smoke curling upward like a departing soul. Dante stood over the body, breathing hard. His tuxedo was torn at the shoulder. Blood splattered his white shirt, his face, his hands. None of it was his. His chest heaved with each breath, adrenaline still coursing through his veins, the knife hanging loose in his crimson-stained fingers. He looked like what he was, a killer, a monster, the devil they all whispered about in terrified tones. Slowly, he turned. Elena stood in the kitchen doorway, exactly where he had left her. The gun hung from her trembling fingers. Her red dress was ruined beyond salvation, soaked with wine and blood and melted snow. Her elaborate updo had collapsed, dark hair tumbling around her shoulders in wild tangles. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. But she hadn't run. Dante walked toward her. Each step felt like 1,000 miles. He stopped an arm's length away and reached out, gently uncurling her frozen fingers from the gun's grip. She let him take it. I told you to run. His voice came out hoarse, scraped raw. Elena's eyes found his. I don't take orders. A ghost of defiance flickered in her voice. Remember? Something cracked in Dante's chest. You could have died. The words tore out of him. That bullet could have hit you. Any one of them could have shot you. You had no training, no experience. You walked into a firefight in a goddamn evening gown. So could you. Elena's chin lifted. You walked toward 3 armed men with an empty gun. You were going to let them kill you. That's different. How? Because I'm expendable. Dante's voice broke. I'm the monster. I'm the devil. The world doesn't lose anything when I die. But you're not expendable. Elena stepped forward. Her hand rose and pressed flat against his chest, right over his hammering heart. Her palm was cold against the thin fabric of his bloodied shirt. You're not expendable to Marco. Her voice shook but didn't break. You're not expendable to Bruno or your men, or all the people who depend on you. She looked up at him, and Dante saw tears glistening on her lashes. You're not expendable to me. The words hung between them, fragile and immense. Dante stared at her, this impossible woman, this exhausted waitress with holes in her shoes and fire in her soul. She had seen him kill. She had watched him end a man's life with cold efficiency. She stood surrounded by bodies and blood, and the evidence of exactly what kind of creature he was. And she hadn't run. I said I wouldn't touch you. His voice came out strangled. Condition 3. I said you were safe from me. Elena's hand slid up his chest to rest against his jaw. Her thumb brushed the blood on his cheekbone. Maybe I don't want to be safe anymore. Dante closed his eyes. Every wall he had built over 4 years of grief and guilt. Every barrier he had constructed to keep the world at arm's length. Every promise he had made to never let anyone close again. They all crumbled to dust. His hands came up and buried themselves in her hair. He pulled her against him, crushing her body to his, not caring about the blood or the cold or the corpses around them. Tell me to stop. The words came out as a growl against her temple. Tell me to walk away. Because if you don't, Elena, I swear to God, don't stop. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't tender. It wasn't the kind of kiss that belonged in fairy tales or romance novels. It was desperate, consuming, savage. 4 years of loneliness poured into it. 4 years of frozen grief and forced solitude and believing he would never feel anything again. He kissed her like a dying man gulping his last breath, like a man who had been drowning in darkness and finally found the surface. Elena kissed him back. She grabbed fistfuls of his ruined tuxedo and pulled him closer. She rose on her toes to meet him, matching his intensity with her own. She didn't care about the blood on his hands or the bodies at their feet. She didn't care about conditions or boundaries or all the reasons this was a terrible idea. She just kissed him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had been trying to drown her for 28 years. When they finally broke apart, both gasping for air, Dante pressed his forehead against hers. You're mine now, Elena Marshall. His voice was raw, possessive, leaving no room for argument. Mine. And I don't share. Elena laughed. A wet, broken sound that was half sob. Was that supposed to be romantic? It was supposed to be a warning. Consider me warned. Dante pulled back just enough to look at her. Snow caught in her hair like diamonds. Blood smeared her cheek where she had pressed against him. She was a mess. A disaster. The most beautiful thing he had ever seen. We should go. His thumb traced her lower lip. Before the police arrive and I have to explain the bodies. Elena glanced at Petrov's corpse. Will there be questions? Luca will handle it. The official story is self-defense. Dante's arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her toward the alley's exit. No one will look too closely. No one ever does when it comes to my family. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. But in that moment, standing in a blood-soaked alley with snowflakes falling around them like heaven's tears, Elena didn't hear them. She heard only the beating of Dante's heart against her ear. And for the first time in her life, it sounded like home. 2 weeks after the governor's gala, the Petrov Empire crumbled like a sandcastle at high tide. News spread through the underworld like wildfire. Nikolai Petrov was dead. His lieutenants scattered, his territory carved up and redistributed. The Russian faction that had terrorized Manhattan for over a decade simply ceased to exist, swallowed whole by the Romano machine. Luka Morozov stepped into the vacuum with seamless efficiency. He pledged allegiance to Dante publicly, kissing the ring in a ceremony that every crime family in the city witnessed. The message was clear. The Russians now answered to Romano. Anyone who disagreed was welcome to voice their concerns directly to Il Diavolo himself. No one did. Victor Crane disappeared 3 days after the gala. His apartment sat empty. His phone went straight to voicemail. His usual haunts knew nothing. The police filed a missing persons report that would gather dust in a cabinet for years before being quietly closed. Elena didn't ask what happened to him. She didn't want to know. Some debts, she was learning, were paid in currencies other than money. Life at the Romano estate settled into a new rhythm. Elena moved her meager belongings from the guest room into the master bedroom, Dante's bedroom, their bedroom now. She hung her thrift store dresses in a closet that could have housed her entire South Bronx apartment. She placed her mother's photograph on the nightstand beside Dante's watch and cufflinks. Small invasions, quiet claims, the slow merging of 2 broken lives into something whole. Marco bloomed like a flower finally given sunlight. He laughed now, loudly, often. He ran through the mansion's halls playing pirates with the household staff. He insisted Elena tuck him in every night, demanding stories about brave sailors and magical sea creatures. And sometimes, In sleepy moments when his guard was down, he would call her Mama. The first time it happened, Elena froze. Marco didn't even notice. He just yawned and burrowed deeper into his pillows, already drifting toward dreams. Elena had cried silently in the hallway for 10 minutes. Lily's surgery came 2 weeks after the gala, a perfect kidney match. The transplant went flawlessly. Dr. Vance declared her recovery ahead of schedule, her prognosis better than anyone had dared hope. "I'm going to live," Lily had whispered, tears streaming down her face as she clutched Elena's hand. "I'm actually going to live." Elena held her sister and sobbed with joy and relief and gratitude she didn't know how to express. On a cold, clear night in early December, Elena found Dante on the balcony of their bedroom. He stood at the railing, gazing out at Manhattan's glittering skyline. The city stretched before them like a carpet of stars, millions of lights flickering against the darkness. His breath misted in the frigid air. Elena wrapped herself in a cashmere throw and joined him. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. Dante shook his head. They stood in comfortable silence, shoulders touching, watching the city pulse with life far below. "I never thought I'd feel this again." Dante's voice was hoarse, raw. "After Isabella, after the bomb, I thought that part of me died with her. I thought I'd spend the rest of my life frozen." Elena reached for his hand. "You don't have to explain. I want to." He turned to face her, his dark eyes reflecting the city lights. "You deserve to know who you're with, what you've chosen." He told her everything. About Isabella, their courtship, their wedding, the way she laughed at his jokes, even when they weren't funny, the way she sang off-key in the shower, the way she made him feel human in a world that demanded he be a monster. About the morning she died, the flat tire on her car, her borrowing his instead, the bomb that was meant for him ripping her apart before he could say goodbye. "I blamed myself." Dante's voice cracked. "For 4 years, every single day. If I had been faster, smarter, if I had checked the car myself, if I had never fallen in love with her in the first place, she'd still be alive." His hand trembled in hers. "I became the monster everyone feared because I couldn't feel anything else. The rage, the violence. It was the only thing that filled the emptiness." Elena lifted his hand to her lips and kissed his scarred knuckles. "You're not a monster, Dante." "Elena, monsters don't save children." She met his eyes steadily. "Monsters don't build hospitals and fund orphanages when they think no one's paying attention. Monsters don't stand in frozen gardens at midnight, crying for the wife they lost." Dante went still. "You saw that?" "I see everything." Elena smiled softly. "That's what people forget about waitresses. We're invisible. We learn to watch, to notice what others miss." She reached up and cradled his face in her hands. "I saw you, Dante Romano, the real you, before you ever saw me." Something broke open in his expression. 4 years of ice cracking, melting, flowing away like spring thaw. And then Dante laughed. It was rusty, unpracticed, the laugh of a man who had forgotten such sounds existed, but it was real. Elena decided it was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. 2 years later, the Pacific Ocean stretched endless and blue beneath a cloudless California sky. Elena stood on the balcony of their Malibu beach house, her bare feet warm against sun-bleached wood. The salt breeze played with her hair, now longer than she had ever worn it, dancing in dark waves around her shoulders. She wore a simple white sundress that fluttered in the wind like a flag of surrender to happiness. Below, on the pristine stretch of private beach, Marco was playing volleyball with Lily. He was 11 now, tall for his age, all gangly limbs and boundless energy. His laughter carried on the wind, bright and free, the laughter of a boy who had finally learned that joy wasn't something to be afraid of. He dove for the ball and missed, tumbling into the sand, and came up grinning. Lily spiked the ball over the net and cheered. She was unrecognizable from the frail woman who had arrived at the Romano estate 2 years ago. Her cheeks were flushed with health. Her body was strong. The kidney transplant had given her a second chance at life, and she had seized it with both hands. She was taking online classes now, studying marine biology, talking about graduate school. Elena watched them play and felt her heart swell until it hurt. The diamond on her left hand caught the sunlight and scattered rainbows across the wooden railing. Lily called it the size of regret ring, joking that Dante must have done something terrible to need a diamond that big to apologize. Elena called it the most beautiful thing she had ever owned. Warm arms wrapped around her from behind. Dante pulled her against his chest, his chin resting on top of her head. He pressed a kiss to her bare shoulder, his lips lingering on the small scar that remained from that snowy night at the Meridian. He kissed that scar every day, a silent thank you, a wordless prayer, What are you thinking about? His voice rumbled against her back. Elena leaned into him. The night we met. The snow. The blood. The champagne. Dante turned her in his arms until they were face to face. The California sun had bronzed his skin and softened some of the harsh lines around his eyes. He smiled more now, laughed more. The devil was still there, lurking beneath the surface. But he had made peace with his angels. Any regrets? Elena considered the question. She thought about her cramped apartment in South Bronx, the mold on the ceiling, the radiator that never worked, the nights she lay awake, calculating how many shifts she needed to cover Lily's medication, the bone-deep exhaustion that had become her constant companion. Then she looked at the man before her, the crime lord who had become her protector, the widower who had learned to love again, the father who now tucked his son in every night and read stories about brave sailors and magical seas, the devil who had given her heaven. I'd take the glass again, Elena said softly. I'd take the bullet. I'd walk into that alley 1,000 times. I'd do it all again, Dante. Every single moment, because every moment led me here. Dante's eyes glistened. He opened his mouth to respond. Mama! The shout came from the beach below. Marco was racing toward the stairs, sand flying from his feet, his face split with an enormous grin. Mama, come quick! Lily's cheating again! She says my spike was out, but it totally wasn't. It was out by a mile. Lily called from the net, hands on her hips. Don't let him fool you with those puppy eyes. Elena laughed, the sound bright and free. Coming, baby. She kissed Dante quickly, a promise of more later, and ran down the wooden stairs toward the beach. Her feet hit the warm sand and she raced toward her family, her dress streaming behind her like wings. Dante watched her go. Bruno appeared at his side, silent as always, holding a phone. The Petrov remnants have been handled, boss. Bruno's voice was low, professional. The last cell in Brighton Beach. They won't be a problem anymore. Dante nodded slowly. His eyes never left the beach, where Elena was now refereeing the volleyball dispute with exaggerated seriousness. Marco clung to her arm, pleading his case. Lily demonstrated her spike with theatrical flair. Their laughter drifted up like music. Good. Dante pocketed his hands. I have more important things now. He descended the stairs, leaving Bruno and business behind. Marco spotted him coming and whooped with excitement. Papa, you can be on my team. Mama's being unfair. I am being extremely fair, Elena protested, but she was smiling. Dante pulled off his shirt and tossed it aside. He jogged across the sand and lifted Marco onto his shoulders, spinning him around until the boy shrieked with laughter. Romano team versus Marshall team, Marco declared. Best of 5, you're going down, Lily grinned, tossing the ball in the air. In your dreams, Dante replied, setting Marco back on his feet. Elena caught his eye across the makeshift court. He winked at her. She blew him a kiss, and as the sun began its slow descent toward the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose and amber, the Romano family played volleyball on their private beach, their laughter rising to meet the crying gulls overhead. A waitress who had nothing, a devil who had lost everything, a boy who had stopped speaking, a sister who was dying. They had found each other in blood and snow and chaos. They had built something beautiful from the wreckage of their broken lives. They had proven that even in the darkest corners, light could find a way in. Elena's voice carried over the scene, warm with memory and gratitude. I used to believe I was born to survive, not to live. That happiness was a luxury not meant for people like me. I worked 3 jobs and slept 4 hours and convinced myself that was enough. That wanting more was foolish, that dreaming was dangerous. But in the darkest corner of Manhattan, I found my light. In the devil's den, I found my home. And in the eyes of a man the world called monster, I found the love I never knew I was looking for. They say angels have wings, but sometimes angels wear aprons and serve champagne. Sometimes angels have scarred knuckles and blood on their hands. Sometimes the ones who save us don't look anything like what we expected. This is my family now, built from broken pieces, glued together with love and loyalty, and the stubborn refusal to give up on each other. And I wouldn't trade a single moment. Not the glass, not the blood, not the terror or the pain or the nights I thought I wouldn't survive. Because every moment led me here, to this beach, to this sunset, to these people who are my whole world. Home isn't a place, it's the people who make you want to stay. The camera pulled back slowly, capturing the 4 figures on the golden beach. Marco spiked the ball. Lily dove and missed. Dante caught Elena around the waist and spun her in celebration. Their shadows stretched long across the sand as the sun sank lower. A family, whole, happy, home. This story reminds us that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Elena Marshall was terrified when she stepped between a drunk man and a child she did not know. She was terrified when she picked up a gun she had never fired. She was terrified every single day she spent in a world that was not meant for her. But she did it anyway, because some things matter more than fear. Love matters more. Family matters more. The choice to protect the innocent, to stand up for those who cannot stand for themselves, that matters more than any terror our hearts can conjure. And sometimes, when we are brave enough to step into the darkness, we discover that the darkness was hiding our greatest light all along. If your heart raced when Elena picked up that gun, if tears filled your eyes when Marco called her mama for the first time, please take a moment to hit that like button. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue bringing you stories that touch your heart. We would love to hear from you. What would you have done in that alley? Would you have run to safety, or would you have stayed to fight for someone you loved? Have you ever found family in unexpected places, or discovered strength you did not know you possessed? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and your stories inspire us just as much as we hope ours inspire you. There is nothing more precious than hearing from our beloved viewers, from learning what moved you, what made you laugh, what made you cry. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss another upload. We bring you new tales of love, courage, and redemption every week. Stories designed to remind you that hope exists, even in the darkest moments. Thank you for joining us on this journey with Elena, Dante, Marco, and Lily. Thank you for believing in love that blooms in unlikely places. Thank you for being part of our community. From the bottom of our hearts, we wish you good health, abundant happiness, and peace in your daily life. May you find your own angels in unexpected places, and may you have the courage to be someone else's angel when the moment comes. Goodbye for now, dear friends. Take care of yourselves and each other, and we will see you in the next video.